G'day, guys. This clip is taken from a 2 hour long interview with Sam from the Worldwide Warhammer podcast, where we talk all things WTC and Team Australia. If you'd like to see the full interview, check out the links in the description below. And with that being said, let's get into it.
Look for the Blood God.
You just touched on there, Dean, about the coaches. So do you mind introducing who the coaches were for Team Australia, then maybe like a brief synopsis of what their roles were within the team? Because as you said, there's a more important role than just being a food and beverage person, but that is also important.
Yeah. So the way I look at it is it's just like when you're building a list, right? You've got the damage dealers in your list, but then you also need, your action monkeys. You can't win the game if you don't have somebody that goes out and just does the objective. You need something that can just go out and contest that objective. They don't have to do any damage. They don't have to, whatever. That's the sort of mentality that I wanted our coaches to have. One of the challenges that Australia's had in the past was we've had people in those player roles that are absolutely rock star players, but they weren't really adapted for the coach role. And what that resulted in was people getting a little bit too hands-on and a little bit too involved in things that perhaps they shouldn't have been. And it was a detriment to the team. So we basically sat down as a team, as a leadership, me, Jeremy, and Matt, so the previous attendees, and we basically said, look, like what happened in the previous year was a weakness of our strategy. So this year we're going to have a hard rule of only 4 coaches, and those 4 coaches have to have a very specific and clearly defined role, so that they don't tread into waters that they shouldn't. So essentially what we had was we had Dalton Nugent from the Risky Rollers. He was our pseudo head coach, so to speak, and our referee liaison. So his primary role was making sure that anytime there's a ref call that needs to be made, he was there, present. And he was developing a rapport and a relationship with those refs so that he could ease the transition and make sure that, the communication was good, because obviously a lot of the referees are French, or they're from other nations, so there's a bit of a language barrier there. So making sure that we've got somebody who can clearly understand them, work with them, and keep track of what's happening, that sort of thing. So that was Dalton's main role. And then he also, being a YouTuber himself, was really critical towards the reporting back to the Australian people at home and updating the Facebook page with the live posts and that sort of stuff. Then we had Lawrence, also from Risky Rollers, and he was our replenishments guy. So he was going around and he was creating platters that had a bunch of Tim Tams and fairy bread and shapes and all these different Australian cultural classics. And he was basically going around making sure all the players were fed, had water, had drinks if they needed energy drinks or something like that. Like, he was our go-to guy for all of that sort of stuff, making sure that everyone was comfortable and able to operate at their prime. And even just that in itself was that takes almost a full round to do, because by the time you've refilled the 8th person's water, the first person's water needs to be refilled again. So he's just running around doing all that sort of stuff, getting that all ready. And then he was also helping Dalton out with a lot of the YouTube and the live stream stuff. He was doing all the graphic work for us and that sort of stuff. So he's busy doing that whilst Dalton's doing his referee stuff. Yeah. Then we had Oliver Johnson from Queensland, and he was our score tracker. So he was the one that was going around, when the pairings were done, he would update on what our predicted score for the round is. And then he would be going around monitoring the games, keeping up to date with the scores, and then basically relaying that information to the players. Because one of the few things that you can talk to players about is the score. So you can say to the player, you were going into this, originally you were planned to get a 12-8 win. Are you still on track to get that? Yes, no. And if they're like, no, it's probably looking more like a 10-10 draw now, well, they'd go, okay, well, we've just lost 2 points off of our predicted score. He would then have to independently look at that score sheet and decide, is that information that the rest of the team need to know about? And if so, who specifically do I want to talk to? Because obviously the last thing we want is to have him go around and tell everyone, oh, Dean was supposed to win, but he's going to lose now, so you all have to pick up an extra 5 points. That's not necessarily helpful. So he had to sort of independently look at it and go, okay, well, which games can we flip? Which games are the players saying, oh, it looks like if I play risky and if I pull off these couple of charges, I can turn it into a win, that sort of stuff. He would be figuring out all of that, relaying that information and keeping all of that up to date. And then the last one we had was Adam, and Adam Batista from WA. and he was our like vigilator or our observer. And basically, his main role was to, if there was any games where he could identify any angst or any opponents that he identified required observing, he would go and basically watch their game and be there as an extra set of eyes for the player. Because obviously, like, they're 4-hour rounds, you got a lot of time, but there's plenty of times where, you know, you're on this side of the board, you're putting away some casualties or something like that, your opponent starts rolling some stuff, and it's you can generally trust people, but, you know, it's better to trust and also confirm, right? So having Adam be able to go, cool, my opponent keeps rolling when I'm not looking, I want you to be standing next to my opponent for the entire game and make sure that everything he does is above board. And as soon as you do that, the opponent just goes, cool, I'll just do everything above board because I'm being watched, right? So there's no chance of any dodginess happening because they've got somebody watching them. So just having that set of eyes is really important. And it's really important to have the right people for those roles. Adam's a very quiet guy, a very lovely guy, but we knew that he was going to be able to observe and not interfere. And it's a very hard line to walk, that one, where you see them doing something like you might see your player make a mistake, a tactical mistake. And the last thing you want to do is interject and say something, but it's also very hard to keep your mouth shut because we're all used to playing practice games where, you know, you yell out at your mate when he's doing something stupid. Like that's what we've been doing for the past week at the boot camp, right? So being able to switch that on and fill that role was very important. So that was the main 4 roles that we had our coaches fill.
Yeah, very, very, I guess, set roles, and it makes a lot of sense, those roles of what they're doing. It makes great responsibilities, and obviously being that person observant and biting your lip, I know I've had to do it a couple of times as coaching and observing. It's so hard to bite your lips. Sometimes like, what are you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
It's very hard. And then also the culinary expert with in Lawrence, providing of the Tim Tam slams for a global audience. It's amazing. I love it. So
the reaction that they had to the fairy bread was fantastic. They were like, "What is that?" That was so
what
good.
is this goodness? Amazing.
Yeah,
amazing.
It was very well received.
Look for the blood god.